In my previous job as fire management officer, what it ended up being was more of a fire program manager at the end. And that is in large part because the job became more administrative in nature. And that is something that a lot of people have a hard time with, frankly. And I tried to dodge a lot of that administrative stuff as much as I could early on, but as the program grows and gets more complicated, that administrative burden becomes more and more. And we were such a small shop that there wasn't a lot of other people to do a lot of that administrative work. I tell people all the time that if I had it to do over again, I might just rather stay as an engine captain somewhere for my career rather than do what I ended up doing. But ultimately, someone has to hire those engine captains, and that someone ended up being me. Probably for I was in the job 15 years, probably for a good 10 or 12 of those years. I was directly involved in the hiring processes to the point where, probably again for the last 10 years or so, I was doing everything at the station level, building the recruitment packages and sending them up to the regional office, and that's how it worked with us. I would do the recruitment package, put the paperwork together, send up to the regional office, to the personnel department up there. They would make sure all the the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed, and they would actually push the announcement out, apply the announcement, and then it would come back through them. They would get the applicants, go through the rating process, the evaluation process, and then they would generate the certificate, the list of names, and send it back down to me, and then I would do the interviews and make the selections, send that back up to the regional office for processing, and that's how our hiring process went. Now I know a lot of places don't do it that way. Again, we were just we're a relatively small operation. A lot of places use centralized hiring. We started to use some of that toward the end of my career for seasonal hires, particularly, and it worked pretty well. But the process was much the same. I would generate the product at my end, send it up through the regional office, and then the regional office would, pass it along to someone else. In this case, kind of a BLM program, and then it would backtrack the same way though. It was just a different means to get that certificate. The outreach for that was always through USA Jobs, open source, and that to me is the way to reach the most people, to have everyone have the most opportunity to apply to those jobs. So what I wanted to do was talk a little bit about that hiring process from my point of view, and then touch a bit on diversity, because diversity is a big thing now, but it's not a new thing. Again, for all those years that I was involved in the hiring process, diversity was part of what I was being asked to consider when I was making selections. So what was I looking for when I got that cert list and got those applications in my hand? A couple of things I was looking for specifically. To start with, I was looking for qualifications, both in terms of qualifications to be on that cert list, and you would think that would be something obvious. It's not always. You need to bear in mind that while I'm generating the recruitment package and sending it up, I'm not the one doing the evaluations of the applications coming in. It's someone in HR, someone in a personnel department that's not a fire person. They're not fire staff, at least in our case. So all they're going by is what is provided on those applications and what the criteria is that I'm sending up and what the criteria is from, like an OPM or something like that. So the ratings that are coming back, the ratings for you as an applicant, isn't being done by me. It's being done by someone else. It's not a fire person. So don't make the assumption when you're submitting an application that the person that's looking at that application at first, knows what you're talking about. I have seen cases where I've looked at a certain list and looked at an application and saw where someone was qualified for something, but was not rated as that, because the person that was doing the rating didn't know what they were looking at, or it wasn't clear in that application what that actual qualification was. So you need to be careful when you're doing that. So what was I looking for? Again, that qualification, it's a fire qualification. It's whether this person actually belongs on that cert list. I was looking at, obviously there's a name and an address attached to the application. The address I paid a little bit of attention to, but kind of a minor detail, just in terms of the location where the person was, where they were coming from. But mostly what I was looking for was that experience. So I was looking at their job history. I wanted to see where they worked, what jobs they had, whether they had a diversity of experience working for different agencies, different locations, whether that specific experience was best suited for what I was looking for at a particular time. What else was I looking for? What else is on an application? Experience, education. To be honest, I didn't pay a lot of attention to the education. It just really wasn't anything that I felt was particularly relevant. With some jobs, with a permanent job, for instance, that education level is important, but for a seasonal job, I don't care. I don't care about that. What are some other things I look for? I looked at references, and I looked at, probably more importantly, supervisors that I could contact, whether these folks had worked someplace that I was familiar with, that either I knew the supervisor or I knew someone that worked there that I could reach out to, because one of the worst things you can do is hire someone blindly without checking at least the references. Now, generally speaking, people aren't going to use references that are going to say bad things about them, although I've occasionally had that happen. But the best person to talk to about someone's work habits, their behavior, their performance, is the people that they work directly for. That's the best way to go. So I looked at those folks, and I tried to make contact with someone along that chain that knew these people that could vouch for them, or at least provide some input as to what kind of an employee this person was. So those are the critical points that you look for on a job application. How does that then tie into the whole diversity question? Because all those things that I mentioned that I was looking for when I looked at an application, diversity, whether they were a minority candidate, really wasn't one of those things I was looking for. And by minority candidate, what I mean is minority in terms of the fire service. And that's a bit of a difference. So a lot of what we're talking about in diversity hiring as far as the fire service is concerned is in large part hiring females into the fire service. And I say that because females are historically underrepresented in the fire service. And I went back because I kind of kept track of everything to the best I could. And I went back and looked at my records, and I just looked at the seasonal hires and the interns that I hired, over my course of time, just to see. And I kind of added the numbers up and came up with about 16 or 17% of the seasonal and intern hires over that course of time were female. And we had a joint partnership for about 5 years or so with some local partners, state and TNC partners, where we hired a joint crew of seasonals. And if I threw those folks into the mix, into the total, that bumped the number up to around 20% female hires. And that was, I don't know, but I would guess that's probably fairly typical of hiring across the fire service. Now the thing is, again, I didn't keep track of this, but just from my recollection, seeing all those years of certs and all those lists of names, I would guess, I would be fairly confident in saying that probably the same percentage of females that I hired or ended up hiring was pretty much the same percentage that ended up on those certs. So I would say probably not more than 25% of the total lists that I got were female. So that's the applicant pool that I'm drawing from, that I'm trying to hire from. And the thing to remember is that I'm not the only person trying to hire these people. So if a woman applies for, let's say, 20 jobs throughout the nation for seasonal fire jobs, and she ends up on 20 different certs, I'm not the only person that's trying to hire that individual. There are probably 20 hiring managers out there that are looking at the same thing and are trying to hire this person. Now that's great for that person. If you think of it that way, that person probably has their pick of any one of those jobs. And a lot of times, I would get a well-qualified female on my cert list. I would call them up to interview them or, to see if they were interested in coming to work for me. And most times the answer I got was, I've already accepted a position somewhere else. I'm interested in another job somewhere else. I'm going back to work another season at my previous duty station. So those are the kind of answers I got a lot of the time. And so, just saying you want to, have more diversity in your individual program, it just doesn't work that way. It's just not that easy. One of the ways you can try to broaden the field is by hiring at lower grade levels. For the seasonal hires, if you're hiring, basically you're doing intake of GS3s. They're coming in with very little experience. They're going to need by default more supervision, and that can be problematic when your permanent staff, the supervision itself is very limited. But that is one way to bring that diversity into your program, or at least bring in bodies. Now, I wasn't looking for bodies; I was looking for qualifications. I didn't have the luxury of being able to hire a large staff and have some of them be inexperienced. I just could not do that. So really, the bottom line for me in trying to hire anybody was, strictly to try and get the best person for the job, the most qualified person for the job, and anything after that really was a bonus. So that's that's kind of an overview of the hiring process, at least from my point of view, where I worked and how that process ties into that desire to diversify the workforce, and how that actually, the nuts and bolts of that actually works. And it's not as simple as just pulling people in off the street. And sometimes that seems to be what people think it is, and how how it works, and it's just not how it works.